Hey everybody, it's Angel from Halo Inspirations. We give you inspirations to help you spread beauty and joy through your quilting journey. So today is borders and sashing. We are almost over that halfway hump, right? Because this is week 3 of a summer quilting tale, which I've been in collaboration with Vicki Holloway of My Creative Corner3, and we've been just having an absolute blast. Absolute blast. Now, speaking of Vicki, she has a saying. She's known for one of her sayings, one of many, right? But this one it's even on her private group. It is, now I'm going to forget, right? One stitch, one block, one row at a time. And this is exactly a perfect demonstration of what she means by that. This definitely is one stitch, one block, one row at a time. And it is a ball, but breaking it down and thinking in those terms, it just makes it so much better, so much better. So I just wanted to share that because I thought it was very unique. And it could be applied to life, right? Okay, guys, so as you see, I'm filming this after I'm finished. So I've already done the rest of the video and I've come back to the beginning here to do a short introduction. And I just want to say that these are my methods that I use, okay? There are other methods of putting borders onto your quilt tops. This one is mine. And I also want to say I did break up my sashing and attached it to the first 2 rows. But if you were going to do traditional strip sashing, whenever you apply it, find by folding your quilt top, that row, in half, put a pin in the middle, fold your strip in half, put a pin in the middle of your strip, your sashing strip, line the 2 pins up, the center pins, pin right sides together, the sashing and the row, pin the 2 ends, and then halfway in between before you start doing the 1/4 inch seam. It will help tremendously, okay? And that's actually the method that I use to put on my borders. Now, I'm also going to demonstrate how to cut length of fabric. That's actually, I was able to do that with this quilt. And I'll talk about that, why you might, what other places that you could use length of fabric instead of width of fabric. I also understood that most of you would probably need to use width of fabric. So I did a short demo without stitching how to put that together. So I'm going to take you back in time to the beginning before this was all complete. So I'll see you all in just a second. Okay, welcome to my design board again. And as you can see, I've began to put my sashing together. Now remember, I'm not doing the traditional one long seam or strip, okay? But I did cut a 2-inch strip. That I did. Got a couple of them cut, got them ready, because what I'll do is I will take a block, for instance, like this one. This one I've already measured. It is 6 inches. From my sashing strips, I will cut a rectangle of 6 inches to sew at the bottom, okay? So that's what these are. I measured each one of these blocks and I cut a piece of this sashing to match. At that point, when you go to press, you'll want to press it. This one I pressed going down. This one I pressed going towards the books. This one is going towards sashing, books, and sashing. So when I start to put these things together, that seam's going to nest really nicely. Okay, so that's why I did this. Now, once all of my book blocks, because some of them have 2, some of them have 3. So once they have a piece of the sashing attached, I will be able to see if I need to add something, another book, or I need to take something out to get them roughly rough, because remember, I haven't sewn these all together yet. So it'll be a rough estimate about that they're going to be about the same at this point. Once I have that mapped out, I am then going to assemble all of these blocks together, okay? Again, these will nest. However, on this row, I'm going to say, I'll sew them, when I go to press these, the seam will all go this direction. This one will go all that direction, and this one will go all that direction. Just makes it easy. It's actually not necessary, but if I do that, it's consistent. That's the only reason at this point. You don't have to worry about it too much because these seams probably will not line up, okay? So once I have all of them together, I am then going to square them to where they need to be, which again is why I have 3-inch blocks at the end of every one of my rows. So if I got to pull off a 1/2 inch or 3/8 of an inch so that they all are equal, I'm going to pull from here. I'm not going to pull from my pocket. This is a pocket. There's no way I can pull from that. I'm not going to pull from my tilted books. I like this unit just the way it is. So I'm going to pull from here. I'm not going to pull from here either, as much as I can help it, because this part of the strip is tiny, right? But I'll make sure at that point they're all square and they're all the same length. And then I'll take this row and I will attach it to the first row. Yes, I'm going to have a long seam. Then I'll take this row and I'll attach it to row number 2. Yes, I'm going to have a long seam. And the one key thing about long seams, guys, even if you don't do this crazy method and you do the traditional where you just have everything squared, you know exactly how long your sashing needs to be, you're going to go ahead and do 2 long seams, pin, pin, and pin, okay? That will help the shifting to be not happen, to be prevented. You want to prevent any shifting or slippage. Pin, pin, and when you think you pinned enough, pin again. Because that is going to help keep your sashing where it needs to be. Okay? It helps incredibly. I don't like to use pins as much as possible, but here and in borders, I always pin longer seams. Okay, especially if I don't have something nesting. Being broken up, I'm eliminating 1 long seam, but I still have this one. The bonus is none of these are going to probably line up together. So I'm just going to sew just like you are on a long strip. Okay, I hope that wasn't too confusing. I am going to, at this point, get a lot more done, and then I'll be back here for more. Okay, I wanted to bring you in just for a minute, just to show you some of my thought processes in case you were doing it the same way I am, okay? I don't want a lot of this video to be about this part or this process of this quilt. I want the next stage to really, this video to be a bulk of border so we can get that flat top, right? And not have wavy borders with our quilt. So the first thing I'm going to do is throw up a picture. And in this picture, you can actually see that I have all of the sashings connected to each different book block, right? They're all done. And you can kind of see that some are longer than others. I expected that, right? Now I've got all of these things put together. And as you will notice, this one is the shortest. This one is next, and then we have this middle one is the longest, right? And I will tell you, I'm measuring by eighths because I have to work with the eighths in this situation. And this is actually 30 and 2/8. This one is just a couple eighths different. And then this one is between these two is like an inch, okay? So I had to think, where am I going with this? Well, I had a couple of options. I had a few options actually. If you'll notice in this row right here, I've got my sideways books, super cute teacup on top, but I got a nice gap here in between my books, okay? So how many times have you ever seen a book line up completely straight without anything next to it and not fall over, right? So the first thought I thought of was ripping this seam out and attaching this book right next to this seam right here and sewing it up. That would make a little more sense, okay, in the book world, right? But then I thought, nah, I really don't want to do that because I don't want to be friends with Jack today. Not today. Maybe another day, but not today. So my next thought was, I can pull from here. Okay, I have enough of this block that I can do that, and I can basically square this to this size, okay, and then take this, pull from here to make it match this one also. The other thought I had, to be honest, was adding another book down here, but see, I'd add another book and then they'd still not be equal, so I'd still be doing this same amount of cutting, and I would have had to make another book and add another book. So I decided I am going to just pull from here. And like I said, I'm really glad that I did this way because there was no math, okay? You could have very simply measured each book, how many seams you're gonna have, and take the seam allowances out for every row. And then you could have built this exactly right the first time. But I didn't want to think like that because there's a lot of seams. Okay, so that was a lot. I just wanted to slap this thing together, put it together, and figure it out. So I'm so glad I did because there's zero math. I just had to think, how am I gonna, which row, how is gonna be, what is going to be the standard. And so row 3 is my standard, and loving this. So that's where I'm thinking. So the next thing I'm gonna do is just square these all off, and then I'm gonna take row 3, attach it to row 2, then I'll take row 1 and attach these together, and then we're ready to start the next step. So the next time you see me, we are definitely going to be starting borders because that's where I want the majority of this video to be for you. So I will see, it'll be a while for me. I got to get all this cut, squared, and attached. But with you, I'll see you in a few seconds. Okay, so as you can see, I got them all on here. Ready for some borders? Yes, me too. Now I will tell you, I wanted to just first say, as far as, because we're not working with a pattern and this is all going on in your creativity, before you sew your sashing on, whether you're doing traditional, normal method, or you have elected to do it this way, audition your fabric, okay? Number one, you can see whether or not you're gonna like that fabric in your quilt, but also you can see if you're gonna like this size, okay? So this is a 2-inch strip. This was left over from when I was doing my sashing. So beforehand, I will simply take my 2-inch strip, or I will lay these pieces down on top of my fabric and move it to see exactly how big I'd want it. Now, if I wanted this 2-inch size, I would know that I just have to cut a 2.5-inch strip, okay? If I had a 2.5-inch strip and I moved it in, I could see if I wanted to go skinnier. And I ended up doing 2-inch strips, and they finished at 1.5 in the sashing. And I did the same thing, only I did it on the fabric, with my border, trying to decide how wide I was going to actually utilize. Now, I've heard this, and I don't know where I've heard it, but a lot of people say it's like three, if this was a 1 inch, what might look good is a 3 inch, right? This is a 1.5. This is going to finish at 3.5. So I can't necessarily say it's not exactly 3 times, but it's about that idea. But you know what? I know that that seems really crazy, and for me, it gave me a starting point. Let's just see. But you can do whatever you want. You want these skinnier? Go for it. You want these bigger? Go for it. Now, that's auditioning fabric. And like I said, when I audition, I usually put down, like I put this quilt down on my table on top of the fabric so I could move the quilt to see exactly how much. Because I struggled a little bit. I couldn't decide if I wanted 3.5, if I wanted 4, if I wanted 4.5. And I went back and forth, and I even pulled my husband in to look at it. Because after a while, it just starts to, look all the same. So once I got this whole thing together, though, I wanted to know, even though I squared as I went, stuff happens, right? It happens. I mean, you could square as you go all day long. How many of us have sewn together a twin size quilt and your top is skinnier than your bottom, right? It might even be 1/2 inch, but you might see a 1/2 inch difference. So what I actually did, and I put this on, it fits on my dining room table very easily. I want somewhere flat where there's not going to be any pull on the quilt, okay? Because it changes your measurements a little bit. So I wanted it nice, and I just smoothed it all out onto my table. And I very simply took my measuring tape and I measured. To be honest with you, I go in about, I don't know, somewhere between an inch or 2, maybe sometimes 3. I don't measure along the exact edge, okay? Because there's a lot of stuff going on out here. Because there's, you've got more stretch. It's not as stable. So I go in about an inch or 2, and I very simply measure from top to bottom. Then I go to my center and I measure top to bottom, and then I go to the end, same thing, about an inch or 2, and I measure top to bottom. They were all the same. Thank gosh, right? But that doesn't mean I'm completely square. So I did the same thing going from, I measured this way, I measured down the middle, and then I measured at the bottom. Now, a lot of people, when they're off by more than 1/4 inch, we'll say, they'll take the 3 measurements and divide by 3. Some people just take 2 measurements and divide by 2. I don't do any of that, okay? I just use the middle of my quilt's measurement if I was off. The beautiful thing about borders will square. If you're doing it right, it will square your quilt when it's not square. And if you do it right, you won't have the waves, okay? So I got very lucky with this. I think, I wrote them all down, but one of these directions, are off by less than 1/8 of an inch. So I'm not even going to worry about that, okay? Now, as far as using length of fabric, that is exactly because I was square. I'm going to do length of fabric instead of width of fabric. And I'll show you what that means. I've never done something that was more than 1/8 of an inch off because the length of fabric doesn't have a lot of give. So a lot of us are making smaller wall hangings, and it's so easy to square that. But if you've done something big, it makes it more challenging to be able to square it with a ruler. And if you're not off a whole bunch, you know, 5 inches, we got a problem, right? But I can imagine that a lot of people are not going to get as lucky as I did with this. And they might be doing something too big to square the top. So you're going to use your borders to do that. So I decided if I was going to teach correctly in a way that was useful to you, because how many of us have squared perfect all along and we get down to the end of it and it's wonky, right? It's just a reality. Fabric moves, we move, our 1/4 inch seam may be off at the end, at the beginning. There's so many things that can affect the way you cut, can affect it. So I thought to be fair and to give you something that you can utilize, not just with this quilt, right, but with something else, I will go ahead and do 2 strips along the side with width of fabric. And I'm going to intentionally cut one piece. Well, I'm going to intentionally cut the first piece a little bit longer, okay? And I'm going to cut the second piece a little bit shorter. Because why would we do that? So you're going to measure down the middle. Now, some people don't even measure. Some people will lay this sucker out flat. They will find the middle, lay a piece of, their strip down, and then cut. But only down the middle, right? Well, let's say when I measured my 3, let's say this was 90 inches, this was 91, and this was 90.5, okay, from top to bottom. When you take your 90, it's going to be slightly different on each side. So how do you deal with that, right? This is part of how we get it to be square. So that's why I'm going to do this with width of fabric, and I'll rip the seams, and I'll show you why I'm using length of fabric when we get to the cutting board, okay? And why you might want to use width of fabric. So first things first, once your sashing is on, take a peek to see how square you are. And if it's small, square it. Life is great. If it's not square, then we know we're going to do width of fabric, right? Write down your middle measurement, okay? I also check right now, but I don't write that measurement to keep, and you'll see why. The first strips we're going to put on are the long ones. The next strips will be the top and the bottom, and that I am just doing that. It's not a right or wrong, it's a preference. I like visually what that does for my eyes, okay? It changes the look of things. But some people like to do top and bottom and have their sides. That's fine, you can do that. But I do up and down first, okay? The verticals. So, as far as cutting length of fabric. So normally we fold it selvage end to selvage end, and we get there from the shop, we get the side, as long as we wanted, the yard, the 6 yards, whatever it was, right? Well, when you do, and then we cut, then we cut from bottom towards the selvage, right? Which is your width, which is about what, 40, 42 inches, right? With length of fabric, we're actually going to cut along beside the selvage. So you're going to fold the opposite direction. I have one side of selvage here. You put them together. All right. And we're going to cut from along the parallel to the selvage. That is length of fabric. Okay. Now at this point, I think it'd be easier if I go ahead and bring you to my cutting board. I want to show you why I'm really excited that I can use length of fabric, and when I really want to use length of fabric. And there are ways that if I was off by more than 1/8 of an inch, not with this quilt, it won't work, but I can do a stop border. What's a stop border? You know, those little skinny borders that you see, or a smaller border, and then you get bigger. Your first border, I could do that to make sure that I'm square. And then I could, if I'm using a fabric that I really want to use the length of it, that would be the idea, would to do one border and use it as your second. Okay. So that's how you fold it. Completely different. So now I'm going to take you into my cutting board, and I'm going to show you why I'm using it, how to cut it, and then I'm actually going to take this strip and I'm going to cut it into half because it's 4 inches. And then I will be able to show you how to ease in extra fabric and what to do. Like, I'm going to cut this, the next time I do it, I'm going to cut it so it's a little shorter, so you can see how to do a shorter side. Okay. So that's the plan of action. Like I said, I really wanted to give you something that had value to you. And like I said, I feel like I won the lottery. So at any rate, I will see you guys in just a second. Okay, so here we are at my cutting mat, and I have the 2 selvages put together. And as you see, my fabric up here is longer than my cutting mat. Okay, so I can't cut that up there, and I ain't even going to try and shift anything if I don't have to a whole bunch. And this is the one time I will fold again, and it completely 100% makes me nervous, because if y'all remember, cutting is not my friend. But I'm simply going to fold this again, and when I do, I'm going to line up my print with my selvage. Okay, get this nice and pretty. And to believe it or not, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this end and fold it in a little bit, because I don't need much at this rate. I'm only going to need a couple of strips. So I am right-handed, so instead of messing with anything else crazy, I'm going to turn my cutting mat because I am going to actually cut the selvage off. Okay. And I'm going to do it pretty close to the selvage, trying to keep everything looking straight. And this part always makes me nervous, especially since I'm doing this on camera. So I'm going to give it a cut, take that selvage off. Then I'm going to rotate again. Now I said I wanted 4 inches. So what I'm going to do at this point, I'm going to line up on my 4-inch mark. Okay. Nice and straight. Now remember, I cut on the line. My line is right on top of the fabric. It does not hang off. Just want to make sure I'm good. I'm going to cut a strip. Okay. Not bad. I got a little bit off, just a tiny bit. But let me show you something. So this is my cut to selvage length of fabric. And I'll take a picture before I deal with these things. But this one is the width of fabric. And as you can see, the length of fabric, okay, is truly they're straight, okay? Your print is straight. The width of fabric gets a little wonky. It always does. I'm going to cut another strip. But I'll take a picture of that. Now, when it would become really important is when you're dealing with and this time I'm going to use more of the print instead. But when you're dealing with like plaids or fences, you know, things that really have a straight line, and it really gets super crazy. And I don't know how many of y'all have cut width of fabric, but then, you know, the lines look very distorted. Much better. Much better. I got a little bit off again up here, but it won't show too bad. Okay, now when I talked about the give and take, so this is the one I cut again, width of fabric, and man, you can really see it. And I'll do a picture here too of inside my quilt. I could have done this with my sashing, and you can see it pretty obvious whenever you go and look at it closely. Far away you can't tell at all, but it will show up, especially when I try to line things up. It'll be really, whew, you know, not so pretty. But here, well, I don't want to stretch this one because I'm actually going to use it. Here, I'll do it down here. So it does have some give, okay? This way is taut. So when you cut length of fabric, it's really taut. And if you need some stretch, because your strip isn't quite as long as your quilt when you go to put the borders on, you're not going to have that stretch available to you, okay? It can get a little crazy, you know, if you don't get these lines. I mean, look how straight. I'll take a picture of that too. This looks really good. So it gets really nuts if you've got those lines with the plaids, and there are just some fabrics that I want to cut length of fabric. And this is one of the reasons why. And I really like the feature that it doesn't have a lot of give. Now you got to be careful with that, but some people use it when they do rectangles. So you very well could use length of fabric when you did your strips for your background, right? Because it'll keep it nice and straight, and there's not a lot of give. So if you're sewing along and you pull, you're not distorting it. So that's why I wanted to use this, especially after what I saw inside my sashing. And as you can see in that picture, and I'll throw it up here again, it's very, very wavy looking because of the way that print is. It's not straight going width of fabric. It's straight going parallel to the selvage or length of fabric, okay? So that's why I got really excited to be able to use this and be able to talk about it with you. And if you're doing that small quilt where you can square it, this is fantabulous. It really does help keep things straight. You don't have the stretch and pull that you might do when you're sewing. It's a great method to utilize for different purposes. I usually only use it for borders, and it's with those fabrics that really are dependent on keeping things nice and pretty and straight. So I'm going to go ahead and prep the with the fabric. I'm going to cut this into 2-inch strips and put the strips together. And I'm just going to do a horizontal. I'm not going to do a bias because this is so wide, it'll waste a lot of fabric, and I don't want to do that. So even when I put my length of fabric together, I'm basically going to match up my print, okay, because I can see that. I'm going to then pin it, okay, and I'll use one of these lines to guide me to get a straight look, and it'll be close when I do that. But if you use the diagonal, you can, but I'm just choosing not to because that line will be really long and I'll have a lot of waste of fabric. So if this was a smaller strip, I would definitely utilize the diagonal like when you put your binding together. So that's how the plan goes. I am going to get this this piece. I'm going to go ahead and get it prepped, and I'm going to show you on my quilt. I'll rip seams later. I'm going to show you on my quilt how to get your border on, especially makes it easier with the fabric when you're not square in your quilt. Okay, so I'm going to demonstrate that, and that way I will see you in just a second, guys. I got to get this ready. All right, I came up with a plan here. I know that this is, I think it's 30 1/8, but we're going to pretend like this middle section was, like I told you, you want to measure the centers only and cut your strip what the center says. It's the most stable part of your quilt. So let's say it was a little bit longer than the top, okay? The first thing, so I cut it a little bit longer so you can see this. Hopefully I cut it straight, but this is for demonstration purposes. I decided to do it this way because I've been handling this thing so much that it's starting to ravel. I really need to get it finished. So now normally, like I said, I'm going to do the vertical sides first, and then I'm going to come back to the design board and we'll talk just a little bit more. But I'm just demonstrating if you were using with the fabric, because it is stretchy, okay? And you needed that stretch because you needed to make this square. So for the top and the bottom, you would cut them both identical size to whatever the center area is, okay? That way, they're both square, okay? All right. Then what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to find the center, and don't do the math, because if let's say you had 6 blocks and or 7 blocks, you just find the middle of the one in the middle, your seams might be off. So you want to try and find the middle as best as you can. Then I take a pin and I pin it, especially since I'm using black fabric because it's harder to see. You can just crease it if you'd like. All right, now remember, this is going to be a little bit longer, but we're going to next find the center of your strip, okay? And again, I'm going to put a pin in it just because it makes it easier for me to see. And then you're going to take right sides together. And you want to line up your centers. Okay? And go ahead and pin those. Okay. Now you'll see I'm a little bit longer over here, but what you're going to do is you're going to go ahead and line up your corners. Okay. Pin that in place. Come to the other side. Pin this one in place. Okay. Now you're going to make sure to get these lined up as best as you can. And then you're going to want to ease in the waves. Okay. And all that means is we're just kind of trying to make it a little bit even. Okay. Then you're going to take another pin and about halfway, put a pin in it. Again on the other side. Try to keep those straight. All right. Then halfway in between that. Halfway in between these. Halfway in between here. And halfway in between here. Okay. And I would probably even go and do a couple more. And I just keep going halfway until I feel comfortable that it's going to stay where it needs to. Now, one of the things that I do is if in fact, whichever one is longer. So we know that this right here, the border was longer than the quilt, right? And we're trying to gather and spread the evenness and really ease that extra in. So because the border is longer, I'll put the border on the bottom, okay? When I go to stitch this 1/4 inch. And trust me, it will work out, I promise. But it does work out. You just want to make sure that you've evened out all of your waves, okay? Your extra fabric is mixed in here. Now, the reason why you want to put the longer side down is because it does have extra, and the feed dogs on the bottom of your machine with the pressure of your presser foot is going to help ease that in, okay? So that's if it was too long, right? So what if it was just a little shorter? So we had 30 1/8 inches, but maybe it's not 30 1/8 inches. Maybe it's something less than that. Now you won't know until you bring your strip up, because the only measurement you really got to do is this one down here, right? The one in the middle. Now again, I'm going to do the verticals first. This is just for demonstration. But we're going to cut this just a little shy this time. Okay. Now I don't want to end up, oh, there we go, cutting my quilt, because I do have it pretty stable and squared. So this time we're going to make it a little short. So now we sat down, And when we lay it out, we realize, oh darn, it's a little short, right? Well, again, I can still see the crease mark here. You're going to want to find the center by folding it in half, right? Then you want to find the center of your strips. Okay. Put a pin in it. Right sides are going to be together and the centers are going to be together. Now this is a very good reason why you want all of that extra stretch. The next thing you're going to want to do, make sure your quilt is laying flat, and you want to match your ends and your corners. You're going to want to do it on the other side. Okay. And then, and it will pull it. That's why you have that stretch. That's why this stretch is going to be helpful. This is why if you are not square, that you would want to be sure to use width of fabric and not length, because the length will have absolutely zero give in this. Okay, and then basically you're going to do the same thing. You're going to go about halfway. Make sure you're lining these up pretty good. Go to the other side. Go about halfway. Then again, go to this side. Go about halfway. I'm going to go ahead and whoop. Okay. And you'll just keep on going. Just keep it going halfway. Once you get all your pins in, go ahead and sew your 1/4 inch seam right along here, making sure to pay attention and make sure that these things are staying straight. And that will help force this straight line. So it'll be whatever this measurement was. Let's say it was 29 1/8 instead of 30 or 29 1/7 instead of 30 1/8, or 29 3/4 even. So you're going to go ahead and do that. So it'll be 29 3/4 here, 20, and of course we got the measurement from the center, so it was 29 3/4 here, and then when you did the bottom, it would be 29 3/4 also. Okay, but again, we are going to, I am going to do my verticals first, and I am square, so I'm just going to go ahead and do the same thing. Now remember, when you find your center, I already did this. Yeah, it's right here. So you want to go ahead and fold it in half top to bottom, and then making sure that you are really nice and straight, you want to put your pin in the middle. I know it doesn't look like the middle. Wait a minute. But the thing is, I got a seam right here. So there we go. So you want to put your pin in the middle, that direction. When you go to do the other side, you want to do the exact same thing. Fold it from top to bottom. Put a pin in it. Okay? So whenever you go to put on your verticals, you have a pin in the center. Then you take your strips and you fold them in half and find its center, put a pin in it, and lay them down right sides together. Okay? and then do the same process that we just did, and then sit down and sew your 1/4 inch seam. So I'm going to go ahead and get my sides on. I'm going to do this process just like you. I just have cut exactly what it is because I know that it is square. So I'm using length of grain. I'm going to get it down on here and get them both done, and then I'll meet you back at the design wall. Okay, borders are on. Well, the side ones are, right? Yes, absolutely. Now I am not going to lie to y'all. These are some long seams, so I was a little nervous. So as soon as I got them on, got them pressed, went to the dining room table, laid it out, and I did check to make sure that I was still square, and we are good to go. Right? So what is our next step? The top border and the bottom border, right? Now, in this point, you're going to want to find about the middle here, from border to border, okay? I would actually fold this in half to find a rough estimate of where that border would be. I'd go ahead and measure it, cut 2 pieces, or, you know, make 2 borders that same length. Find the middle by folding this in half, put a pin in it, take your borders, fold them in half, put a pin in the halfway mark, put your pins together, pin the right sides together. The border lays on top, right side together to the quilt, matching those middle points. Pin at the middle, pin on the left, pin on the right, and then start working halfway, 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 and then go back and cover the places that you think you might need, okay? As soon as you have laid out and have it pinned from border to border, at that point you're going to take it to your sewing machine, right? And you're going to stitch that 1/4 inch beautiful seam. And as a reminder, if your border is longer than your quilt, because remember, we're cutting from the middle measurement. So if your border is longer, the border goes on the bottom. If your quilt is longer than the border, the quilt goes on the bottom. So those feed dogs can help ease that extra fabric in, okay? When you go to press, take it to your board, set your seam, and then press so that the seams go towards the outside of your quilt. So this one will go towards the border, this one towards the border. They say that it really helps to help make that that top more flat. Now, if they're all going the same and you need them to go the other way, so be it, right? It ain't the end of the world, okay? But I do press mine to the outside also. This is a flat surface. It'll hold it well, okay? And I like how it makes the actual seam look. I like the mountain to be on the side of the border opposed to the side of the quilt. Another preference. And again, you could have started by just putting this top border on to this area, and then you would add the verticals afterwards. But this seam right here would carry all the way to the top of your quilt, right? For me, I like it the other way. I like my border to go across this whole top piece, and it creates like a little frame out in my mind. So it's a total preference. So that's why I got my sides on first. Now I'm going to add the top and the bottom. So I'm going to go do that off camera. I think I am probably the slowest sewist ever. So it'll be a little bit for me, but it will be very, very short for you. So I'll see y'all in a sec. Okay, so all the borders are done. Bear with me. I can't hang anything straight without a level. And if you'll notice, I'm pinning down here to hold this up because it's so heavy. If I pin it up here, I started to do that. I will tell you it will stretch it, because remember, I've cut on the length of grain and not on the length of fabric, not on the width of fabric, right? So that's why that's like that. But it needs a good cleanup and it needs a good press, but it's done. Now we can talk a little bit here about borders. I'm not going to do anything else to my borders. I am going to leave it as is. When I'm done with the quilt, when I'm done quilting and getting the binding on, I am going to add 2 buttons to hang my coronavirus masks on when I'm done using them, right? But other than that, I'm not going to. Now, I did get to thinking about this a few days ago, we discussed, I was talking about bias stemming. And if you don't know what that is, I have never done it. I just know what it is. But it's basically cutting your fabric on the bias and creating stems. And you can do some really cool, neat things that are more rounded. So you could actually do various different designs with it that curve. Because you cut on that bias, it will curve for you. So you could really put some awesome bias stemming type applique, or even other kinds of applique. Some people do it before they put it on, so you don't have to contend with the whole entire quilt top. Some people wait so they can look, they can see where that middle, and make sure that they're good to go and that they're straight. So I did want to talk a little bit about that. Like I said, I'm just going to leave mine. But if you have any questions, don't hesitate to drop them. I will be on Facebook Live today at 3 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time to answer any questions, and I will probably add a few things into that conversation. So that'll be on my Facebook page down below. I will tell you, this was so much fun putting the borders on. I actually enjoyed it, which was a surprise because they're long seams, and you know they make me nervous. So next week we will be doing quilting, okay? Then all you have to do is bind it and celebrate that you finished and not have a UFO. So you need to make sure if you're following at the same pace, okay, be sure to get your borders and sashing done. Get your batting prepped and get it basted. So you'll have to prep your backing too, possibly. And I am going to use a homemade spray base to base this. There is a video that I've done about homemade spray basting. So I'll put the link wherever that button goes. I will put the link there for you if you're interested. But that's the method I think that I'm going to use for this quilt. It very simply fits on my dining room table. It is not going to go on the floor. It's not going to hurt anything. I'm going to definitely do that. I got to get my backing prepared, so I'm going to do that tomorrow and get it started to get basted. So, because it takes a little bit with the homemade spray based. It does take a little bit extra time, but it's well worth it. So make sure that you get your borders and your sashing done. Get your batting and your quilt basted and get ready to quilt. I also wanted to mention that Vicki's group is alive and spreading beauty and joy of their own. And if you're interested in joining her group, you can find the link down below. She also shared a short video on how, I think she's calling it, oh gosh, now I'm going to forget, but I think she's calling it her pandemic quilt. So she did a short YouTube video about that. So I'm going to put that link down below too. And it might inspire you to do some other things with your quilt if you're so interested. At any rate, I also have Creative Kingdom, our private group. We have awesome people in there too. And this past week, both of our groups did a Zoom sew-along. Had such the best time. So if you were there, I want to say thank you for coming out. I absolutely enjoyed it, and I know that I will definitely be doing another one. So if you're inside our group and you're interested in doing some Zoom, you know, hour or so, hour, 2 hour, just sit and chit chat, come and leave as you want, join the group, and we'll get that, we'll get you in there as long as you answer those 3 questions, right? And then when the next Zoom will be along, then I'm thinking about maybe once a month for a little while. And so if you're interested in that, come out to the Creative Kingdom, answer those 3 questions, because it is a private group, and get your keys to the kingdom. So guys, I will see you today at 3 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, okay? Or I will see you next Wednesday. But until next time, may y'all continue to be inspired, productive, and ever so joyful, and never stop making your dreams in quilting come true. See y'all later. Happy quilting!